Good morning, everyone. This is Dan, and I want to welcome you back to the Napkin Academy. Today, what we're going to be talking about is this concept of spanning differences when we are thinking through our ideas. And the really simple thought behind this is a great idea isn't one or the other. A great idea is when we manage to combine both. This and that gives us a great idea. Best example I could think of, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. What Reese's Peanut Butter Cups are, for anybody who's not familiar, is a wonderful candy. In fact, they're my favorite candy because what's really remarkable is you have chocolate around the outside, and on the inside you have peanut butter. So you're combining two excellent things to make something that's better than either one of them. And anyone who's probably older than about 25 years old who grew up in the United States will be very familiar with an advertising campaign. There was some music playing and you'd see this fellow walking down the street enjoying a piece of chocolate. And then you'd hear a different piece of music and you'd see this woman walking along enjoying eating some peanut butter. And all of a sudden the two of them would round a corner and hit each other, and oh my gosh, one would say, "Oh, look at that. You got chocolate in my peanut butter." And the other one would say, "You got peanut butter in my chocolate." And then they'd take a bite, and it would turn out to be better than anything they'd had before. And this odd fellow who's behind them actually says, "Hey kids, I guess you weren't familiar with Reese's Peanut Butter Cups." And the two of them, the boy and the girl, go off happily together, eating their peanut butter and chocolate together with the tagline, "Two great tastes that taste great together." This is the idea that I'd like to share with you. When we are trying to make an idea, we don't want to focus solely on our verbal mind, nor do we want to focus solely on our visual mind. A really good idea is one that spans both. The reason this is important, we're over here in this very, very busy world where there are so many ideas and so much noise, and we want to make sure that our idea is one that becomes memorable. So we're going to step outside of the busy world for a moment and into the quiet of this metaphorical place we call the vivid forest. Inside the vivid forest, we have this opportunity to take our idea, walk it around the trees of the forest, spend some time with it, and come out on the other side with a far better and clearer idea. In previous sessions, we've gone over F, which stood for form, the F from forest. We talked about O, which stood for only the essentials. How do we boil our idea down to just its essence? R stood for recognizable. Can we find a visual metaphor for our idea? E we talked about last time for evolving. Can we make sure that our idea continues to grow? And now we're going to talk about S, which stands for spans differences. Now this is not a new idea at all, this concept that it's not one or the other. It's when things are combined that they're good. In fact, we can go back to grow somewhat over 2,000 years ago to the Chinese text, the I Ching. And one of the things that was interesting is the I Ching introduced the idea of saying that as the sun goes across a valley, there is the sunny side of the valley, which is called the yang, and there is also the shadow side of the valley, which is called the yin. Now, of course, if you put these together, you realize that the world is not always about the sun, nor is the world always about the shade. As the sun moves across this valley, we get both the sunny side and the shady side. And life, of course, happens when we combine both of those. And here's one of the most famous symbols in history, the notion that anything that's of value or matters is a combination of one part, its opposite, and the thing that becomes the whole when we put the two together. Now this should be of no surprise to us because this looks remarkably like a symbol that we've been using as we've been going through vivid thinking, which is the idea that if we look at our own mind, it's really composed of two different parts, isn't it? In a way, we have the verbal part and we have the visual part. One part makes words, one part likes to make its pictures. And it's the combination of those two parts that make us a whole person. And I thought this was interesting because I came across a quote from one of America's great writers, F. Scott Fitzgerald, way back in 1936. Said exactly the same thing. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. I have an idea that says this, and I have an idea that says that. For me to be intelligent, I need to be able to maintain both of those at the same time and still function. And this is exactly what we're talking about when we think about vivid thinking. I want to give you two examples of where spanning differences has made a very big difference in the world. One example is going to be about the automotive industry, and the second example is going to be about chemistry. Let's go ahead and take example one and just think for a moment about the automotive industry. Now, still, automotive industry has been around for well over 100 years, and for most of that 100 years, it has been essentially gospel truth that if you want to build a car, there's a decision you need to make right up front, a kind of a binary this or that decision. The visualization of that decision looks something like this. If you're going to build a car, you have to decide right from the beginning, are you going to create a car which is efficient, or are you going to create a car which is powerful? You can't do both. You have to decide one or the other. And to look at that schematically, we could take a Hummer, which is extraordinarily powerful. It's strong enough to knock down a tree, but a Hummer only gets 6 miles to the gallon in mileage. Or we could look at a little smart car, tiny little thing. Smart car has very little power at all. It's barely enough to carry 2 people, but on that same gallon of gas, a smart car is able to go 33 miles. So we see that we've got a decision. Power versus efficiency. Now, why is that? Well, because of the limitations of the internal combustion engine, which burns gasoline in order to generate power. Well, a couple of guys recently, not the first time in history, but in this case, were looking at this idea and saying, maybe the right question isn't, are we going to be efficient or powerful? What would happen if we could be both? Well, if the limitation is the internal combustion engine, why don't we think about a different kind of engine? What would happen if we used an electric engine? And it was exactly that decision process, that saying it's not one or the other, but we want to achieve both, that brought about the Tesla. So here we have the Tesla, an electric car that, interestingly enough, is more powerful than a Hummer and more efficient than a Mini. How did we do that? Well, let's look at that schematically for a moment. We remember that our Hummer got 6 miles to the gallon with enormous power. Our smart car got great mileage but terrible power. And look what happens if we were to map out the same gallon of gas equivalent. How far would our Tesla be able to go? It would be able to go all the way out to 135 miles on that same tank of gasoline. And the brilliant part about it is it would be able to do it with great power. This is exactly the concept that we're thinking about when we say, let's not start with everything being a contradiction of this or that. Let's see what happens when we think about doing the two of them together. I want to go ahead and give you another example of this idea that it's the combination of two apparently different ideas that bring us to some of the best discoveries. And this is from the world of chemistry. The person that we want to introduce this time is kind of a crazy old Russian scientist from way back in the 1800s, in fact born in 1830, I believe. This is a fellow named Dmitry Mendeleev. Now, Dmitry Mendeleev was born in Siberia, and if you imagine Russia at that time, here's Europe over here, and here's Russia, and here's China, and here we have it. So Moscow is way over here, St. Petersburg is way up here, and Mendeleev was born way over here. Well, he was a very smart kid, and his parents decided to send him to the St. Petersburg University. Well, this was an enormously long train trip that he had to take, and he would make that trip several times a year. Now, Mendeleev had always been interested in chemistry, and he was very concerned by something that existed at that time, in about the 1850s, a general perception on chemistry that if everybody understood that there were these chemicals out there, whether they were metals or whether they were some kind of gas, and we could name them and we knew what they were. And for the most part, chemicals were broken down into two different, very distinct types of lists. The same chemicals. So one list might say, let's look at these elements, these chemicals, by their properties. So some of them are gases, like hydrogen, for example, or helium. Some of them are acids, like chlorine. Some of them are metals, like titanium. And then there was a second list that had nothing to do with the first list that said, if we look at the atomic weight, that is, something about the atomic structure of each of these elements, we can see that each one of them is different as well. So hydrogen has an atomic weight of 1 and helium has an atomic weight of 4, and so on. But it bothered Mendeleev that we're looking at exactly the same elements. Why do we need to have them in two different lists? And he wondered if it might not be possible to find a way to combine the two lists. And again, on those extraordinarily long train journeys across the Russian steppe, what Mendeleev did is he created a little set of cards. And on each card, he would put one of the elements. He would put its atomic weight, in this case hydrogen, its atomic weight of 1, and then he'd put the label of something that was known about the properties of that element. And then he would sit there in the train for hours at a time, stacking up these cards in different ways, seeing if he could find some kind of a pattern between them. And as he did that long enough, combining the two lists, he came to an interesting realization that if you looked at the number of protons, which is essentially equal to the atomic weight of each element, and you lined things up this way according to number of protons, and then you made a series of columns that mapped out to the properties of each of those, you found that there was a pattern. And all of a sudden Mendeleev says, by Jove, the patterns of all of the elements that we can find seem to repeat. And the repetition goes in a very specific and periodic way. And of course it was Mendeleev who then discovered the periodic table of the elements. So how might we go about doing this in our own ideas? The way that I think we can use our vivid thinking toolkit to help us span differences is something that I call the vivid stretch test. And what we're going to do is we're going to take an idea, our own, and we're going to stretch it as far as we can to see if what starts as one idea might be able to span a few things. The way the vivid stretch test begins is we need to have an idea. And what we're going to do with the stretch test is we're going to take our idea and we are going to intentionally see if we can find its opposite. And what we are going to do is we are going to stretch our idea towards its opposite as far as we possibly can until it snaps. There are two steps to the vivid stretch test. The first one should be old hat to all of us. It is the idea of finding the essential form of our idea. And by way of review, anybody wants to remember how do we find the form of an idea, I would suggest that you go back to the Intro to Vivid Grammar video. And the example that I gave was the lost user, step number 1. We propose the development of a GPS-enabled application that resides on a mobile device. The purpose of this application is to allow the mobile device to take advantage of geolocation services now available to the general public, enabling the device user to pinpoint their location instantly and with great accuracy. We anticipate that this will have broad appeal. So here we have a very verbal, very boring statement about something that is much more easily mapped out. So let's find the form of these words. And remember how we did that. We went through written communication and we identified who was in it, we identified the nouns, and we mapped them out. So we remember that in this particular case we had a user. We started with the user. Not just any user though. This was a user who was sad. The reason this user was sad was because they were lost. So this person is walking around in the city unsure of where they are. Well, imagine if that user had a phone, pulled out the phone. The phone is GPS enabled, so it's able to receive a signal off of satellites, giving the position. The user is then able to see their location, and guess what? They're happy because they're no longer lost. So we've come up with the timeline of what is our idea about. Now we apply the stretch test. So here's what we do. We have to find the opposite of any element of our idea. So in this particular case, we'll remember that we had three basic parts to our idea. We had our user, they had a mobile device, and on that mobile device they had a location application. So very good. Now let's take any one of these to stretch it and say what would be the opposite. One we could say is, obviously a user who isn't lost. That's one possibility. Maybe we could say an opposite is a lost user who isn't alone. Maybe there are a group of people who are lost together. Maybe it's not a problem at all because maybe our user wants to be lost. That's an opposite. Maybe the opposite is we have a user, but they don't have a phone. Maybe the opposite is we have a phone and we have a place, but we don't have a user at all. Now, that's part number one of my stretch test. Let's go ahead and pick one of these. Let's say that the stretch I want to do is, let's say my user isn't alone. Well, now, what would happen if I added in to my application the idea that there are other people out there too? It's not in my original idea. I needed to search for it. Now I've got an even better idea. Imagine if he or she could share their location with other people who have their own mobile devices anywhere in the world. And all of a sudden I've got something that's really powerful. And this is exactly the thinking that went behind the idea of creating Foursquare. Hey, if I've got a GPS-enabled phone and I use it to keep myself from being lost, and you've got a GPS-enabled phone, the two of us could send our locations to each other, and now we can find each other too. So what started as a simple idea now becomes a magnificent idea because we used the vivid stretch test. I want to leave you with one more thought of yet another kind of interesting Russian scientist that I dug up in going through the history of great ideas of this sort. In 1946, Genrikh Altshuler was a part of the Soviet Air Force, and his job was to review patents. And what he realized was, of all of these different ideas that he was seeing, very often the underlying concepts were very similar. So he came up with a way of thinking about new ideas that he named Teoria Решения Изобретательских Задач, TRIZ. TRIZ is the theory of inventive problem solving. The underlying principle of TRIZ is to say that when most of us go about solving a problem, the first thing that we do is we identify some kind of contradiction. This is chocolate and this is peanut butter, and they do not go together. And as I'm going to design something or solve my problem, I'm going to solve for chocolate or I'm going to solve for peanut butter. What TRIZ says is no, no. Get rid of the contradiction and try to solve the problem to include chocolate and peanut butter. And that is when the truly great ideas will start to emerge. What happens if you segment your idea? Let's say this is my problem. Can I break it up into smaller pieces, each one of which might be easier to solve by itself? Or what about looking for asymmetry? If my idea or my problem appears to be the same from both sides, what would happen if I looped it around and looked at it from only one side, made it asymmetrical? Would I see something new? Another one of the ideas was merge. If my problem is composed of lots of individual pieces, is there a way for me to merge them together? It's kind of the opposite of this one, isn't it? And then number 4 here was something called universality. The idea being, if I'm looking at my tool or my problem, can I imagine all kinds of different ways I could use it? So if I'm looking at a gear, I could put it in a machine. Maybe, what the heck, I could make a table out of it. Maybe I could use my gear as a saw. Is there a way to make universal the elements of my problem? When you look up Genrikh Altshuler, he drew everything all the time. Powerful visual thinker. Looks exactly like some of the work we've been doing, doesn't it? And so with that, I want to wrap this up with a homework assignment for all of you about spanning differences. Because look, I understand that this stuff is very theoretical, so I wanted to bring it right down to earth. And I would love you to do this example to see the power of how you can open up your mind by thinking about two things and their combination. The initial idea I want us to start with is sliced bread. You got it. Here's a loaf of bread. We found the form. I'll do it for you. There's a loaf of bread. What would happen if I sliced it up? I want you to find the form. Draw me a picture of sliced bread. How does your mind see that? And then I want you to find the opposite. What would be the opposite of what I've just drawn? And then I want you to find a way, a new idea that combines both. That's the homework assignment. And before we sign off, we have 2 excellent homework assignment work from last time that I wanted to share with you. The idea was we were reviewing homework around evolving an idea. Find a project you've been working on, create a set of words and pictures that help us evolve the idea to make it more clear. And we're going to start with Debbie. So Debbie, let me turn on the phone for you. Debbie, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Dan.
And if you could just take us through your thinking, I think this is a lovely one. What were you drawing here?
I've been working on a project for about 10 months, which on the surface is a software implementation. But the group that I'm working with, they have basically no documented processes. It's all tribal knowledge. And I'm the only person on the team that has any process design or documentation training. So I've been helping them walk through the process. And they really don't sort of grasp why it's important that you need to document it and do what you document and, continually improve. So I tried to come up with a picture of that I could present to them and say, here's sort of like the golden rule of processes. Document what you do what you document, continuously improve, and it goes around and around. And, really it's the heart of what they're trying to do. Move away from tribal knowledge into something that is a process.
And have you shown this drawing to the folks?
I have not. I haven't had a meeting with them yet. But
I think let's make a note for one of the next times after you've had a chance to share it with them. I'm very curious to see what kind of feedback they give you.
Okay.
Where would you like us to start? Should we start with the idea, perhaps?
Yeah, you started with the idea.
Okay.
And actually I walked them through some of these visual exercises. It's like, here's our idea. Here's what we think we currently do.
Right.
And then we put together some process diagrams.
Okay.
And then we built some training material, our user's manual, and some videos are going to be coming up. And then, we need to do that. We are just now live for implementation. So it's like, so we need to follow what we said we think we want to do.
Without
and then we
doing
need
it.
And do it. And then we need to analyze it and go, is that right? Did we miss something? Or, is there a better way to do it? And go back around the loop. And that's, CPI or continuous process improvement is, very widespread, just sort of not with the group I've been working with.
Fantastic. So in a way, this is the continual process of evolving our idea as we do it. And in this case, I think this is really interesting because what we're doing is we're noting down what we do, and then we do what we do, and then we think about it, and then we note down again what we did, and we continue around. Do I have that right?
That's right.
So we're continually evolving it. Fantastic. Debbie, great drawing. I appreciate this one. This is very useful.
Thank you.
Again, excellent work, and we're going to follow up with John. John, I've got you on the line.
Good morning, Dan.
Good morning. Okay. So, John, I think related to some work, it appears that you're doing on healthcare reform. Is that right? Do you want to take us quickly through what you have?
Sure. Assume Medico is a hypothetical name, but the challenge or the problem relates to a real organization. And just to give the context, it's an organization that provides electronic card payment solutions to banks and large corporations. And they did an analysis of its various members, and this is the actual the text of the problems, or what they call their challenges that came up. And they're in 3 columns. On the left-hand side, you have this member-directed demands, and that simply means what our customers want is what we want to focus on.
Got it.
And then the second column is there's a shift from it's a shift towards consumer health care.
Okay.
And then the third one is the concern with revenue. So that's the context.
Okay, so this is our sort of our verbal form, if you will.
That's right.
Okay, shall I jump ahead then?
Sure. This next graphic simply breaks down what they saw as challenges, and you have very nice under each column you have 3 separate challenges. And when you look at these words, they're somewhat opaque. as with the various Fox ideas, they're probably very meaningful to the people in the business. And what I found was there are all these acronyms, this alphabet soup of CDH and HIX, and once you unlock the key of those acronyms, you actually start to see, oh, that's how they see the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than looking at the words, if we go to the next graphic, this has if we just take the top left-hand corner, you see member direct demands. And those three words are all about the organization Medico has to listen to the demands of its customers.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we look at the second column, you see this concept HDHC, and this is talking about high deductible health coverage, but it's looking at the consumer. So, this is the who and what, or this is the second part of the stakeholder management. They're looking at the customers. And obviously the third level for a for-profit corporation is what's our revenue.
And so, John, what you've done is you've taken each of those verbose, somewhat opaque statements and through visual thinking have come up with a parallel visual way to describe them. Is that correct?
Exactly so. And
Okay.
I won't go through each of them or the 12 graphics, but simply as a learning exercise, if you take these concepts, the real challenge and the real solution for a visual thinker is how do I take the words, the Fox concept, and present a hummingbird concept. And it's just a question of playing with these ideas. And I'll just choose one. If you go to the second column and you go down, you see this a gear shift and a consumer sign. Then you see this light bulb. And I'll just focus on that just for one example. What they wanted to come up with was some innovative ideas. So you take a light bulb, which is an innovation in itself, and you put inside that a life principle of a plant, and each of these leaves represents an option. So that was a way for me to start to think creatively about innovation.
Wow, that's a pretty interesting idea. It's a good visual. So should we continue then?
If we look at this next graphic, Medico asked itself, well, what do we as a company want? And they say, well, what we want is what our members want. And what our members want is how they relate to their consumers, which we'll call them cardholders or people who consume healthcare products.
Mm-hmm.
And they want a consumer wraparound. So these five circles around the consumer wraparound represent what I believe the 5 major challenges.
Okay.
And then the final graphic, it just takes those challenges and it selects a hummingbird visual for each one of those. So at the 12 o'clock position, you see the member-directed concept, and moving clockwise around, you see, a shifting gear for plan shifting, consumer-directed health is the third, price sensitivity is the fourth, and lastly, the group innovation. And then as I looked at that, just to close this discussion out, I said, okay, what is a motif that can tie all this together? And it has something to do with consumer-directed health. It has something to do with a consumer insurance exchange. And so in the center, you see this CDX motif with the consumer in the center, which will help Medico focus on what its challenges are and where its solution has to be found with the consumer.
It looks to me, John, like you are facing an incredibly challenging problem here. Just the fact that, with healthcare reform coming along, all of the various issues. I'm just going to back up here for a second, because to me the real lesson from this is we often see when we're in business presentations a page that looks like this, and I can tell you, even looking at this one, it is almost impossible for me to cognitively get my head around what am I supposed to know from looking at this. And what I find miraculous, and why I think this is so powerful, is moving again from too much to keep my head around, beginning to assign some iconographic visuals so I can viscerally know what these pieces are, and then be able to snap them together. So to be able to end up with something like this that does not yet tell me the answer, but it gives at least my brain the sense of calm that I know that I can look at this thing and at least begin to get my head around it. The power of evolving an idea. John, again, thank you very much. Very, very good work. And I'm going to sign off now. And I appreciate all of you taking the time to stay with us. Hey, thank you all for another great lesson. This is Dan signing off from the Napkin Academy. But don't go away. Now on our new platform, you can still submit your homework. Debbie, our community manager, is going to join you right now to show you exactly how to do that. And I really encourage you, do your homework. Okay, take it away, Debbie. See you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this Napkin Academy Classic video. We've made it easier than ever to share your homework. After you've completed your homework and have a JPEG or PNG file saved on your computer, come back to this course. Once you're back here, scroll to the bottom of the screen, and in the comments box, you can add a comment. I'm just going to call this one My Homework. You can also add images by clicking on the Insert Edit Image button here. In the source box, click on the file. In the Images window, click on Upload, and then click on Add Files. This is going to take you to your computer where you can search for your images. I'm just going to search for mine in Pictures, and I'm going to choose this image here. You can also add multiple images here. Click Upload. After the upload is complete, click Close. Then scroll down, and you'll see that the last image is here, and it's checked. This is the one we just uploaded. Click Insert. I suggest in the Dimensions box you change the maximum to 1200 pixels and leave the Constrained Proportions box checked. You can also add an image description here if you'd like. Click OK. You'll see that your image has been added to your comment. And now the last step, the most important one, make sure that you click the green comment button here to upload your homework to the Napkin Academy. We hope to see your homework soon.